I'm delighted to be here. As this was mentioned, I moved back to Panama. I'm originally from Panama, so I moved back in, can everyone in the back hear? Is this not enough? Okay, awesome, thank you. I moved back in August of last year and started this new position at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. And so I was actually never thought I'd say this, but flying in, well, it was really late, but flying in gray skies, rain was actually really nice to come back to the Pacific Northwest. And as again, I never thought I'd say that, but so the talk today is about some pathways to success. I know it seems like what does success look like is the topic of this lecture series this term. And, you know, I don't have to say this enough, right? We're facing these co-occurring crises, right? We're facing climate change, biodiversity loss, and social justice crisis. And so my favorite podcast host, Christiana Figueres, not just a podcast host, but obviously the architect of the Paris Agreement, and just all around amazing, really interesting human. She just calls them the polycrisis. So I don't know if you've heard of the podcast Outrage and Optimism. Really interesting the way which just refers to these polycrisis. And to me, that encapsulates the way I think of these multiple stressors, multiple environmental stressors that make the science that we do really complex, really hard to disentangle. And as scientists, we're trying to simplify so that we can tell a story. So these polycrises really affect the vulnerability of people, and in particular, the most people who are already vulnerable, and in the tropical regions of the world, being some of the most vulnerable to climate change. The tropics are also is one of the regions that has the fastest growing population. And it's also a region that the population is young and the population is highly dependent on natural resources. So this means that and it's also the fastest loss of biodiversity, especially in islands and locations that have high endemism. So this means that in particular, we think about the global tropics, we need to think about ways to leverage. If we're thinking about success and wanting to achieve success in the face of these crises, I think it's really important then to think about those vulnerable regions. In our industry, as academics, when we think about our contribution to addressing these polycrises, we think about science and how our science can inform that. And another contribution that some of us engage with is how that science informs governance and informs the policy process. I realize that not everyone does that, but that is another potential, right? In other industries, other sectors are either philanthropy and they give money, or we think of NGOs and they work with local communities. But specifically, this is a really good opportunity to think about how we do science and how science can inform policy, and in turn, how policy and governance can inform the kind of science that we do. I mean, this is sort of really basic thinking, but I'm aware that a lot of science doesn't include these considerations. And at breakfast this morning with some students, I was thinking, how does that science get into the policymaking process? And that's a really question. So if I'm too vague in today's talk, feel free to come see me afterwards and we can talk about some specific examples of how we do that, because there is, I wouldn't say a science of policy integration, but there are science integration into policy, but there are pathways that can be more successful than others and more strategic ways to do that. And so then, again, when presented with the topic for today's lecture, my first thought is success of what? And so I settled on the success of ocean science in informing governance as a way to address the polycrisis, right? So really trying to integrate this. So ultimately, how we define success is how do we use science to inform governance to address these big challenges of our world? And so specifically, thinking about how we do this in the global tropics. So bringing this global tropics perspective on making ocean science and ocean governance more equitable and more effective. And by equitable and effective is sort of the definition, or my definition, of success. Before we get into the heart of the talk, right, the meat of the talk, I want to share some core ideas, core assumptions, concepts that I bring to this. So just really making sure that this is sort of where the starting point, at least, that I bring to this conversation. If we acknowledge that the tropics are unique in the young population, I mean, some people see it as an opportunity, as a market opportunity, right? But if we see that the tropics as unique, I think we have to recognize and acknowledge that success is going to be different for folks in the tropics, across the global tropics. also, as a heterogeneous region, we're going to have to see that acknowledge that success is going to look different across the tropics. So we can't just say, oh, we were successful in the tropics. There are many, many different places in the tropics that we need to consider. The second core idea, assumption, is that success for some could mean loss for others. And sometimes it can even mean the same thing for the same people. And I think about this as a social scientist when I think of some of the work I do on social outcomes of marine protected areas, for instance. When we think about livelihoods, we think about individuals. You can be a small-scale fisherman, a subsistence fisherman, and at the same time be a tour operator. And so therefore, the establishment of an MPA could negatively affect you if you're a fisherman and positively affect you if you're a tour operator. So it's really complex, right? It's not just an easy thing that more MPAs, more fish, happy people, right? It's a lot more complex than that. And then the third piece is something that, again, maybe this is just a personal trip that I go down, but thinking about how we define success for ourselves and our work is really important because it's what we bring to our everyday. It's our motivation to keep going in the work that we do. And again, one of the reasons why I love this podcast from Christiana is thinking about, how do we keep going in this space? And we have to think about what success means for us in that space. In the context of this talk, for instance, success for me, to give you an example, would be how we bring science and society closer, right? How we bring science to people to make sure that we have more sustainable and equitable future for the ocean and for the people who depend on it. And specifically for me, success, and this is sort of in the current moment which I'm in my career stage, is thinking about how we include the tropical majority, how we include local social science and interdisciplinary approaches into the research that we do related to living marine resources and coastal spaces. And something also that is common in our social sciences is a question of a positionality statement. How many of you have heard of a positionality statement? All right, do we all include them in the work that we do as natural scientists? I don't see any hands. I mean, and whether you write it out, whether you think about it and reflect on it, whether you're explicit in doing this positionality statement, for me, it's really important to share that. So I'm a marine social scientist. This means that I study people. I don't study the species of the people. I collaborate with people that study, species and ecosystems and oceanography. And so as a marine environmental social scientist, I focus on understanding that relationship between people and the coastal environments. And fisheries, right? So in the particular place in which I'm presenting now is a perfect example of that relationship. However, we all approach this understanding or this relationship differently. My personal journey has really convinced me that this social science is the kind of information that we need to better address the global challenges of our time. And so for me, that's my why, and that's the why I do the work that I do, and that's my own personal reflection. I started out in this field about 20 years ago when I was working for development agencies in Panama. So between degrees, I did some little professional work working with agencies. And at the time, the focus was on science. And by science, everybody meant natural science. And so looking, from then to now, to be able to say that the social science is an important piece of that work has been important for me. So I really want to sort of highlight that positionality as marine social scientist. The other piece is I'm from Panama and my mom is British. So I grew up in Panama, I moved there. I grew up there, born and raised with a British mother. And so for me, when I started out embarking on in this space, doing my PhD research, which I did in Panama, working with foreigners who had moved to Panama, was a very personal journey as well. But it allowed me not only to sort of study these processes of why people move and why they choose different places and the impacts that they have in place, but it also gave me an entryway to some of the conversations that I had with people, right? I was able to engage with communities and with people that I was talking to in a way that I don't think I would have been able to do if I wasn't who I was or who I am in that place. And lastly, not obviously I'm a mother, but I am a mother. And for me, that is obviously a really important piece that I bring to everything I do. And importantly, in this work that I'm doing is that shift from the ethnographic work that I think is so important when we talk about engaging with communities and having to grapple with the fact that I don't have the time to leave my family as much as I used to before I had kids. And so thinking about how that has translated or converted my work into this governance space that allows me to do more desk research, engaging, right, going to conferences and things that are shorter as opposed to being embedded in communities. So admittedly, is something that I think about when I think about this work that I'm doing. Can I do this work if I'm not embedded in a community, really truly knowing what they do? So this is just sort of some reflections. For the rest of our time in the talk, I'm going to talk about what these pathways to success. And there's two specific things that I'm going to talk about. The first one is a recent comment we published with a wonderful group of co-authors. Most of us were from across the global tropics. And the second part I'm going to talk about is this new position that I have as founding director of the Adrian Arsht Community-Based Resilient Solutions Initiative, and what kinds of activities within that and examples of research specific that I think can lead to success of integrating science with policy to address the poly crisis. So in 2022, we started this conversation. I was still at OSU at the time. And just, I guess I should have mentioned that. I was at Oregon State for 8 years and recently tenured in the School of Public Policy before I transitioned back to Stride. And so, so first, let's go back to the tropics. This is a picture of the Panama City skyline, which is very developed. And so when we think about the tropics, it's important to think about what is the information about that region that is best suited to respond to local, national, regional, and specific needs, right? So a group of 25 of us published a comment. It was published in Ocean Sustainability, and when we talked about how to engage the tropical majority to make ocean governance and science more equitable and effective. So let's start with how we define the global tropics. There are many ways of defining it. As I said, it's the fastest growing population. It's a young population, highly dependent on natural resources. As I said, markets, people really are seeing this as an emerging market because of the fast growing population. But we're calling it the tropical majority. It's a concept originally used by John Currian in a piece in early 2000s when he was asked to reflect on people in the sea, and it was published in Maritime Studies. We actually engaged with him as well when we were using this, when we were coming up with the concept. But it's a concept to basically address the majority of people that are closely dependent on natural resources. So you can see in the graph top left on A, right? Coastal population within 100 kilometers of the coast. Most of that population is located in the tropics, countries, tropical countries. So making them the tropical majority of ocean-dependent people. The tropical majority is also characterized by impacts of colonialism and histories of colonialism. If you can see the number of countries that have been colonized in the tropics, hugely disproportionate to the number of countries that are not located in the tropics. All our histories are different, but it's a shared history of colonial legacies that make it really important to think about how we can engage and leverage the knowledge and experiences and capacities of this region in order to address solutions for that region, right? And then the one on the right is just sort of by area, the largest space of marine protected area coverage. And again, it doesn't, when we think about spaces that we think about as unpopulated or where people aren't there when we know they are there, but it's much easier to assume that someone isn't there when it's a country that or a region that we're not visibilizing as we should. So these are just some ways of representing what we mean by the tropics. As I said, the age structure of the population is something else, another way of doing it. Size, scale of emerging markets. So we can think about these definitions in other ways. And this is just a graph to represent, you can see between the Tropic of Cancer, 23 degrees north and south, which regions of the tropics. And importantly for this is the governance of the oceans is held by those high income countries in the temperate zones, whereas the regions that receive that kind of impact or that kind of development or that kind of guidance and mandate are the countries in the tropics. And we had lots of conversations about if we should refer to this as global north, global south, rich versus poor, like how we reflected on those terminologies. And everyone agreed that really we should talk about it as an income difference. So we convened 25 natural and social science who either live in or from or work across the tropics. Pictured here is a subgroup that came together in Panama in 2022. with the goal of supporting and engaging with critical agenda setting. So the reason why we got together and held this convening was in the context of our ocean conference that was going to be in Panama in 2023. And so the thinking was really around how can we connect the science that we do, the science that we know, into an existing policy window. And so that's one of the ways when we think about pathways. It's not just saying, oh, I have an interesting science finding, let me see who's interested in doing this. It's thinking, what are the forums, what are the spaces in which I can share this information that might have impact. So that's what we did. It ended up being published after because, of course, that's how things work. But it helped us think through this process. We intentionally invited folks from across the main tropical region. So we included folks from the US. So it was a very, 3 people from each region across career stages and across disciplines. So we had folks from the US tropics, Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. We did not have tropical folks in the Middle East, so acknowledge that gap. And as I said, a balanced mix of disciplinary backgrounds. We had natural, physical, social scientists and practitioners, a balanced mix of career stages, and of course, thinking about gender representation. And that's across the whole group. And again, this is a group that ended up meeting together in Panama. So the process is that we had first 2 virtual sessions, and in those sessions, we talked about the science, there was enough science knowledge in that room or in the Zoom rooms that we said, okay, what are the pressing issues in the tropics from a science perspective? How can we, from your collective experience, just list all the different ones? What are some potential solutions and what are pathways to activate those solutions? So the very specific questions, it was very, very interesting. We had 2 separate calls just to sort of accommodate all the different time zones. The call with the more senior folks was much less creative. Just saying. It was very interesting. It was very, very interesting, but it was much less creative. Yeah, I would just say creative. But very obviously, these are the folks that have published the most, that have had the most impact in their knowledge and in the science that they bring, which is why we brought the 2 together. The second part of the process where we drafted an outline and a facilitation process for the in-person meeting. So from those, we sort of put together, came up with a process for the in-person meeting, selected again, intentional selection of who was going to come to Panama to meet. And then we held a 2.5-day in-person meeting in Panama in October of 22. And I highly recommend organizing an outing on a sailboat with ukuleles and sunsets along the Panama Canal. If you can swing something like that for an in-person meeting, it led to lots of fun conversations. And so one of the things that I love this line in the paper, right? So ultimately, the severing of power, knowledge, and relationship of local people with place reduces access to the ocean and related benefits, erodes or prevents local governance altogether, and hinders both locals' ability to meet their needs and our collective ability to pursue shared goals for people and the ocean. So to me, that was a line that, I don't know, we all felt really strongly about as sort of the driver behind why we wanted to put this paper together. What was really interesting as well at the in-person meeting when things got really interesting. So it became evident that we knew a lot about the science. Maybe it was just the folks in the room, but we had all the information. We knew exactly what was happening in the tropical space. And the challenges posed by climate change and biodiversity loss, we all knew that. And it was fascinating to see how some of these leading scientists, aquatic foods, coral reef, conservation science, all of them coalesce. And this was not by design. This is not something I pushed for, that there were gaps in the data to tell us about how those changes were impacting people. So that's where the gaps were, and that the social aspect of this was critical. So again, it was, I would say, consensus that from the folks leading the science, that the problem was not necessarily, we need more science. We needed to understand better what was happening on the ground. So we came up with, it's a comment piece, right? How much information can you put in there? But we wordsmithed, I think, sufficient to sort of highlight the key topics, key issues that we know about as threats, and then came up with 4 actionable solutions. So key takeaways to achieve solutions for ocean sustainability. And this idea being taking the science that we know and putting it into practice, right? Putting it into some spaces. And again, this is based on those policy windows, those little wedges, those opportunities that we can toe into. So the first one was centering equity in ocean governance. generic, right? Like this is something we have to do. What does it look like? What does it mean? How do we do that? An example of something that we do is, again, I don't know how many of you in this room have gone to our ocean conferences. They have 6 thematic areas: fisheries, sustainable fisheries, marine protected areas, safety and security, transportation, energy, maybe the 5th, I forget. If we don't intentionally add an action area around inclusion, inclusivity, equity, call it whatever you want. I'm really not care about the words, but if we don't include something where we can hold people accountable to that, it's going to be really hard to ask people to make those changes. So that was a try, right? That was an easy one that we thought about, and we did that. We requested a meeting with then Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. We met with him and we proposed this, and we've been engaging with the Department of State over a year to try to activate this conversation, right? And I think the more emails you send out, just a little reminder, and can we please have this conversation? And we're going to Greece this year. Can we talk about this again? As they establish the secretariat, knowing that they're going to establish the secretariat, this is the opportunity, this is the moment in which to insert that, right? So that was one of the things that we talked about. This requires implementing ocean equity commitments across temporal and geographic scales and sectors, right? So again, adding an equity theme to global conferences. It also has to include accountability for past impacts, as well as secure future funding and benefit sharing pledges at these global governance meetings, right? So that, again, something that is possible to do, and we saw in the Our Ocean Conference in Panama, and I'm just using those as examples. There was, I think it was a $51 million pledge between Bloomberg and Arcadia to support work with communities. And so these are the kinds of pledges that we have to follow up and hold people accountable. But these are tangible actions towards that. Another thing is, let's see. So exactly. So these are some of the same ones. So how do we make sure that governments, industry, and philanthropy, right, the key sectors that are involved in this space, how do we make sure that they make commitments towards that? Again, we were at COP in December last year, climate COP, and the amount of funding that is going into climate, nature-based solutions, climate financing is, I mean, numbers that I just can't even imagine. And who is doing that work? How are they doing that work? Where is that money going? It's an opportunity for us to think about, right? I mean, I could sort of sit back and reject all of that, or I could say, let's think about how we can do a just transition. And what does a just transition look like? And these are great opportunities to do that. So these are spaces where we think about what is governance? What are the processes that are ongoing that we have an opportunity to interject and try to make a change? It can be small, piecemeal, but think about scale. It can be national, or it can be global, national, regional, local. Our next step is reconnecting people in the ocean. And this, again, sounds kind of vague. Our focus here was really on legal, right? And in fisheries, we think about that all the time. We think about access, we think about rights, we think about privatization. There are lots of tools that we use in fisheries management toolbox to do these kinds of things. But so we need to take it beyond fisheries. We need to think about tourism, development, like what are the places in which we're actively relocating, taking people out of places that are historically, traditionally theirs. So for instance, we can resist and reverse large-scale coastal privatization and degradation, right? When we think about tourism as an opportunity or as an alternative to some activities, what are the impacts on the folks that live on the ground in all those coastal areas? The other one is through rebuilding and supporting ocean people relationships. And so this could be through integrating alternative property rights. Property rights is a huge piece in this puzzle of ensuring rights and access to people, and something that, I mean, people have written about for a very long time, right? I mean, we can go from Tragedy of the Commons, which I'm happy to have a post-lecture conversation about as something that needs to be revisited, through Ostrom's work, and then through, you know, how do we respect and recognize rights of place, rights of people, rights, you know, just tenure and access. That's a critical piece in the ocean space in particular, especially as we think of the deep history, right? What are the oldest uses of the ocean? Fishing and transportation. So how can we, should we even, right? I mean, it's just a conversation to have. And then let's see. And then really thinking about what are the structures needed to make sure that coastal communities have the agency that they need to do this. And I'm going to talk a little bit at the end of a project that I'm doing in Panama right now through National Geographic. And the lack of agency in these indigenous communities that I was visiting was evident. And so really thinking, how can we shift that? How can we shift that, that piece? This is not sort of a colonial imposition of like, let's make sure that you understand ocean. It's really make sure we give you the rights and the agency and the access to those resources. Redefining ocean literacy, similar. So this is, these are some really great examples, right? Like, why don't we talk more about voyaging? What are some ways in which we could incorporate other forms of knowledge as opposed to just talking about ocean circulation and right, the basics of the ocean system, but there are other bits of ways of knowing that really need to be incorporated into this. And one of the key pieces here is thinking about replacing capacity building with capacity sharing. So thinking this assumption that people on the ground or in the tropics don't know and that need to be trained in certain areas. It's really thinking about how can we learn from them as much as they can learn from us. And finally, this idea of decolonizing ocean science, again, call it, this is not to be controversial, we can call it whatever we want. The whole point here is to make sure that we are thinking about the whole cycle of research through who gets to participate in research, through why are we doing the research and who's benefiting from this research, all the way through the actual impacts of that outcome, that information, and how it gets into the policy process, if that's what you're going to do. And there are different ways of doing that, ensuring that we have equitable partnerships, guarantee inclusive authorship. I mean, this has been a conversation that's been going a lot on for the past few years. I don't need to repeat these examples. I think it's more of a question of acknowledging them and acting on them. So that was the paper. I'm going to shift to the next topic, which is the center that I'm running right now. It was a really interesting process. And I think from there, a lot of people have come up with different ideas. And actually the ideas that I'm in the center that I'm leading now come directly from this, right? So from those seemingly simple, actionable items in terms of how then we take them into how we implement them and what that looks like. So this is the, again, a mouthful, Adrian Arch Community-Based Resilient Solutions Initiative. It's an initiative that's based at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama, but it is Smithsonian-wide. And it's the result of a generous gift from a private donor, Adrian Arch, who, her interests are really on individual resilience, but we've been talking to her a lot about how that, engaging in conversation about how we move from individual to collective resilience. It's a multi-year effort where I'm starting on the science, but there are folks in DC working in the Undersecretary's office who are trying to move the science into the arts, history, culture spaces at the Smithsonian. So those of you that don't know, the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, or STRI, is based in Panama, and it has been in Panama for over 100 years. It has its own history of establishment. It was essentially a negotiation between the then governor of the US, which we had the Panama Canal Zone, which was a sort of an area on either side of the Panama Canal that was US territory. So the governor of the Canal Zone and a scientist from the Smithsonian decided to allocate one of the islands that was formed from the creation of the canal, Dama River. Flooding happens, the top of the mountain became an island, and they decided that that was going to be a place for research. So they're better or worse, 100 and some years later, BCI is there, an amazing center for tropical biodiversity research. So it's based, we decided to center the initiative at STRI because it's located in the global tropics, and because we have the opportunity, we have a long-term knowledge, long-term connection to space or to place, and it's an opportunity to do this work. This is Panama, and this is, we can see the red dots are all the different lab spaces research units that STRI has. And obviously I'm based in Panama City, but the Boca Cedora Research Station is where I was last week. And so I'll show you an example of what that work looks like. This is a vision for the initiative where we're focusing on research, engagement. I call it engagement. Really, I would call it outreach, extension if I was in the right places, but we call it engagement just to make sure folks know what we're talking about. Solutions and training. And so these 4 pillars, I'm focusing or going to start on the research pillar and potentially the training pillar. cross-cutting criteria for everything that happens at the initiative is that it has to be transdisciplinary. So make sure that we include both people and nature. And I just realized I didn't define resilience. So I'll talk about that in a minute. That it has to be youth-inspired. So again, trying to make sure that people feel comfortable, that we're not expecting you to go out and do advocacy necessarily, but that you understand how the science can be put into practice. And then focused on equity, making sure, again, that whole cycle. So an example of transdisciplinary would be the definition of resilience, which we're using for the center. And it is the ability of people and nature to react, respond, and adapt to an external stressor, where we can understand the social and ecological drivers of change. We can understand the social and ecological strategies used. So the strategies used by both people and nature to adapt to change, and then the set of resilient outcomes where, for people in particular, those resilient outcomes are not externally determined. So the people, the communities that we work with have the voice, have the agency to determine what a resilient outcome looks for them. Some activities we're doing, and I just wanted to share this briefly. We just launched our fellowship program, and they're all fit under the Life on a Sustainable Planet vision from the Undersecretary of Science. That includes, totally new for the Smithsonian, climate change, environmental justice, and resilience fellowships. And when we have a Ocean Nexus STRI partnership in one of those fellowships. And the idea is that this is going to be a cohort of about 20 fellows who will also participate in a cohort-based training opportunity. We've also done a series of convenings. We have a whole education program with the Smithsonian Science Education Center, and then we're building on this leadership and science capacity. So currently the initiative is me and a program manager, but we're expanding and hoping to hire, well, we have 2 fellows starting with us for postdocs, and then we also hope to expand into a marine social science hire probably at the end of this year. And I believe we're also going to be putting just a marine science hire out as well, but don't quote me on that, if anyone's interested in the tropics. So I wanted to give a couple of examples. I want to make sure we have time for questions, but I wanted to give a couple of examples of what research under the Resilience Initiative looks like. And this is research that I'm conducting. So one of them is the National Geographic funded, this is a long time ago, my son is now 11. But this is a project called the Many Faces of Conservation. And so it's thinking about the impact and meaning of a national park, an MPA, in the Nova community of Panama. And we were just out in the islands. We visited 4 communities to try to assess their perceptions of the park, perceptions of nature, their perceptions of the park, implications of the park on their livelihoods and cultures, and alternatives to conservation. Again, following that thread of how these tropical majority folks should have the agency to speak about what they see as a solution. During the conversations, instead of inviting people to an event it wouldn't have been in Panama City, it would have been in Bocas, but still Bocas town. We visited for each of these 4 communities, getting to them, I don't know the distance, but on a outboard motor, 2 125s, took us 35 minutes to get out there on a good day. On the day that it was really choppy, it took us a lot longer. We worked, one of the team members is a local indigenous man who studies sea turtles. He's a biologist, hoping to do his PhD at some point. And he had worked tirelessly with these communities in advance of us arriving to make sure that they understood what the project was about, to convene them, and to make sure that they were willing to talk to us about this important topic. Key findings from that work was that they were never consulted about the park at the time of establishment, which is common again across the region. This park was established in 1988. That they were told the park was going to be expanded. And this was in sort of right after the CBD COP on 30 by 30. And the government just kind of came in and said, we're going to expand this area. They actually held one of the Ministry of the Environment people hostage in their community. So the expansion did not happen. Government got around and still expanded other areas, but not this one. And we talked about alternatives to conservation. And the goal of this, obviously National Geographic is through videos and through stories, to have those stories be told from their perspective, as opposed to me going out and sharing those stories. So hopefully the results, there'll be some media assets related to that. The results of that we're hoping will be available at the end of this year or early next year. Really, really interesting. The other finding was that the obstacles, again, nothing novel, but something that had never been consulted with these communities. So getting it on, getting it in writing, getting photos, getting video testimonials is really important to prevent government folks getting held hostage when they go visit an indigenous community. Another example, and this is not marine, but this just fits under the area, is this idea of the Smithsonian bird-friendly coffee and cocoa program. I bring it up just because it's the one program that is across Smithsonian. It's between the zoo, so NCC, the National Zoo Conservation Biology Institute, and STRI, and it hits all 4 pillars. It hits research, engagement, solutions, and training. They work with farmers and producers to make sure that they're doing the right conservation strategies, shade trees, migratory birds. They work with the roasters to get resources from those. They actually get income returned to the Smithsonian with work from the roasters that have the seal. And they will go back to the communities and do lots of training and working with communities, best practices to make sure that you maintain. So this is, again, another example of how we can do this. Quick summary of the criteria then for what resilience research looks like, at least for the center that I'm running now, is to make sure that it's innovative, thinking a little bit outside the box, and that requires working with people that maybe you haven't worked with in the past, disciplines, and a lot of curiosity to think about how we can do things differently. Really important to this work is also partnerships and making sure that we can work with boundary spanning organizations, make sure we have government and end user involvement. And this, again, is to make sure that that science gets into the policy, is if we have a government partner on our team, on our science advisory board, whatever structure we want to have, we know what the needs are and we can align the research with those needs. Typically, we also have an advisory board that's involved in the research, that knows about the science and knows about the kinds of outcomes that they're hoping to achieve, and they can guide us in how to do that better. And then we also work with industry partners. And that's another example, as I was talking about those just transitions. Again, this one could be a little bit controversial for the work, but we're partnering with WEF, the World Economic Forum, on thinking about ocean innovation and how can we can ensure that those billions of climate finance funding are going to be used in a just manner, specifically for the global tropics. And then just really briefly, 2 examples of training. So as I said, this cohort-based training program, we're focusing on leadership, science communication, and policy engagement, providing those tools on how to do that engagement. Interdisciplinary collaborations don't just happen. It requires time, trust. So we think about how to do those, and then thinking about equity inclusion across the whole research cycle. And it's going to be led by Compass. And then recently, the Smithsonian Science Education Center has a program called Science for Global Goals, and they produced an ocean guide. And it's amazing what they can do with a 1-hour interview, that they turn it into something really useful for K through 12. So I would encourage you also to look at those Science for Global Goals. They have a suite of resources. So if anybody works with K through 12, really, really fantastic resources. So back to, I guess, just to close, how do we define success? All the 2 examples I showed, one is, those very concrete 4 actionable strategies. The other one is this initiative. It's starting. I am really thinking deeply about how I can ensure accountability in the activities that we do, and ensure that there's monitoring and evaluation of the process along the way. But one of the key pieces, as I think about the program evaluation, is success for who, right? Is it for the resources and the environment, right? When we think about MPAs, for instance, people define it exclusively as conservation of nature. But if it's just conservation of nature, how are we then going to ask about social outcomes if there was never the intended goal? Is it for the communities involved in the resources? Is success for the fellows, our postdoctoral fellows that are involved in the research? Or is it success for the children that are receiving education through these ocean goals, right? Really clearly define success for whom. For me, personally, I think if we can see an increase in marine social science and interdisciplinary approaches, that's success. If we can see changes in how we do science, that's success. And if we can center equity in everything we do and bring it to the forefront of our thinking, that's also success. Thank you.
Can you see the conflict between social and natural science conclusions on what should be done? How would you deal with those conflicts? Would you raise certain aspects more than others?
I think it depends on what the goal is, right? I mean, so if you're thinking about, again, my mind typically goes to MPAs, but if I'm thinking of a natural science decision about what an MPA outcome should be versus what people want that outcome to be, I don't think you're going to come to an agreement, and I don't think you can rank one higher than the other. I think and there is literature on this as well, is that accepting that there are going to be trade-offs is an important piece. And then what are acceptable trade-offs to decide? And that's one example. And I think the question of trade-offs is going to be the same for fisheries management. It's going to be the same for MPAs, any kind of intervention where people are dependent on resources, you're going to have to think about that. And then the question is it a moral decision? Is it a livelihood decision? Is it a biased decision by a government? I mean, there's going to be all sorts of ways to think about it, but I don't think you can rank one above the other.
One of the things I've been thinking about this term has been inclusiveness in sort of the political aspect of the policy process versus inclusiveness in terms of being represented in science, as having a social science, scientific input to the political process that captures interests, impacts, and outcomes on particular groups. How in this context do you think about whether you're doing that well?
Whether we're being inclusive in the policy process or inclusive in what kind of information we take to the policy process. Is that, did I understand?
How do you strike that balance? Because I often hear the argument that people can represent their interests in the political process, and therefore we don't use science about it.
Right. I mean, I'm a scientist, academic at heart. I mean, sort of all of these are practical ways in which I take the research that I do. And for me, the science perspective is the one that can represent a broader set of perspectives. It's not going to represent all perspectives, fully aware of that. And as a social scientist, I am very comfortable with a conversation around bias and where you introduce bias. But I think it's different than individuals advocating for their particular perspective. And I think science might allow you to do that a little bit differently. At least some, in theory, hopefully, more transparency around that process. And I was going to give an example, and it just slipped my mind. But I'll come back to that. Yeah, I can't think of an example right now. Yoshi.
Thank you so much for your talk and congratulations on your post. I'm so looking forward to the future to working together with you. So just following up what you said, I think the part we need to discuss is really if there's governance in place, there will be accountability and legitimacy. So people who's not economists wouldn't talk about the resource economy to make decisions, or at least not the design. So I think it's important to have a governance design in place to make sure there is accountability, transparency, legitimacy, and so as much as the science. But having said that, what I really want to ask, when you're talking with Professor Majority, one of the very interesting conversations that I hear is reparation. How much of this policy option, well, it's not really policy option per se, but both policy option and also private industry can actually do that. You come up in your conversation, and is there any perspective in the future you want to push this if you are thinking about equity?
It is something we think about. So when we're talking about reconnecting people in ocean, that is one of those sort of reversing and sort of not just stopping what we're doing, but reversing the damage that was done by disconnecting people from nature. What it looks like, I think, is going to look different in each place. You know, in the case of the communities that we visited last week, one community in particular, well, like, we're not going to stop they dive for lobster. They're like, we're not gonna stop diving for lobster. We go day, we go night. There are less of them. We have to go out farther. And when the season closes, we just go at night and we hide from the people. We're not going to stop doing it. And so they were promised a saquito, a little bag of rice or whatever it was. And that's not reparations, that's more of a subsidy. That wasn't enough. There have been conversations about the property rights, in particular on these islands. This is a big tourist place. And so the way that the property rights and the cost of titling, because a lot of these sort of irregular property rights, so the cost of titling lands became, it was like $600,000 per hectare or something ridiculous. You know, and these are islands that are basically like mangrove islands. And there was a slightly different rate for people that identified as indigenous. However, the challenge with these places is they're not technically on what is considered, you know, the equivalent of a reservation. And so for all purposes, they are just Panamanian citizens. They get no other right or recognition for their identity, which is a problem. Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk. I really appreciated the positionality statement, but that's something we haven't heard from a lot of other speakers so far, which I'm a social scientist, probably can but more naturally to you to acknowledge that. But you talked briefly about how being a mother, you couldn't as easily leave your family to engage with these communities and be as hands-on as you have been in the past. Have you seen this as a barrier to the type of research you've been doing, or have you just kind of shifted the way you started to approach these topics?
That's a really good question. It's really hard for me to talk about the science and the people, the indigenous communities, when I'm not there. And so it is a struggle, and especially in this kind of work that I do, and so how I represent those voices and how I talk about the tropical majority. So I think I feel more comfortable talking about the spaces that I can reflect my own personal experience, or, right, I'm in Panama City now, it's sort of work around that community that I know really, really well. This goes against a lot of what we know about science, right? I mean, I was encouraged not to do work in Panama because I was gonna be biased, or I've seen master's students that their master's project was in their home country, but then their PhD, they were encouraged to do work somewhere else. And I would reverse that entirely and say, like, this is an opportunity for you to go back and give back and do work in this place. So yeah, I have a hard time with that. There's an expectation that if one of the things we're doing in the initiative is working with indigenous communities, that we speak about them and the relationship that I as director have. I can't have that relationship with people because I'm busy doing a ton of other things, right? I have 30% of research now, 70% of research. And so I struggle with that, but I think about it in terms of the research that I know. I think about it in terms of the collaboration that I have and the work that my team is doing. And I try to shift it, as I said, my research now is more global governance, desk research, participatory, participant observation at conferences, different methods to do that. But I will give credit to the people doing the work. So at OSU, for instance, again, I was leading a big research team. I was not the one on the ground doing the interviews. And in fact, when I knew I was going to move back to Panama, we had a collaboration with a coastal tribe in Oregon, and I said, unless somebody takes this on fully and has the responsibility to continue that, it's better if I just tell them and end that relationship now, because I'm not going to be there. So it's hard, because it's something that I love, the sort of in-depth ethnographic field work is very fulfilling that my children can appreciate.
All right, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, again, thank you very much for the talk. And I'm not a social scientist, so I'm not sure if I'm framing this, but it is a question that really comes from curiosity, which is how much of the tropical majority is indigenous? And then are there other underserved folks in the context of ocean policy, especially, that would just be worth my knowing more about in this context?
Absolutely. Gosh, I don't know about the whole tropics. I can speak about Panama. And the population in Panama is very diverse. And so in particular in the archipelago where I worked, about 12 years ago when I was doing research there, I organized categories of West Indian, so it's on the Caribbean side, United Fruit Company, so lots of people that when slavery ended in the Caribbean moved to Panama. has sort of freed slaves and started banana plantations that we eventually sold to the United Fruit Company, but. So we had West Indians, we had indigenous, and then we had Panamanian other. This is the category that I put them in. And so those dynamics between the groups are really interesting to explore as well. So that's a really good question. I think it's really important to be able to characterize those populations. And it's not just indigenous knowledge. There are so many different ways of knowing and acknowledging the different groups that are there, as well as those dynamics. I mean, there's a really good book, another PhD dissertation, Philippe Bourgeois, who wrote about labor practices of the United Fruit Company as a way of creating strife between the indigenous and the West Indian populations as a way of imposing control over what was happening there. And it's so evident in all the interviews that I did. Except for one island, which I don't understand why, where people speak what they call wadi-wadi, which is the sort of English, Spanish Creole, with indigenous languages. It's only one island. So yeah, that's a really great question. I think it's important to characterize as best you can the wide range of perspectives.
All right, there is a reception outside, but let's thank